You know, we're taking questions on the on the chat on New TV. So if you have any questions, you can chat them in, and then they'll be forwarded to me here. But one of the things that we talked earlier a little bit about, you know, the marketing to Hispanics, and Manny and Cesar, both of you touched on it. I wanted to know from Cesar, from your perspective, that when you're standing in the C-suite and you have amazing data that Geoscape produces, and now we have all this information from the census. You've got the elevator speech. You've got, you know, a minute to deliver a message about the economic force, about the power of this market. What do you say to that C-suite when you're in there and you have, you know, 3 minutes to present or 3 minutes to wrap up a big presentation on your capabilities or whatever? What are the parting words that say, look, this is a wake-up call, but more importantly, what?
Well, more importantly, corporations need to know how to take action on it and how to operationalize against this exigency. So most people understand Hispanics are large and growing fast. They may not have it at the right level of priority, but many do not implement an infrastructure plan to operationalize against it. And what I mean by that is that historically, what companies have done is invest in the marketing communications to Hispanics. And that's part of a larger context that has to do with community relations and branding and so forth. But what they have underinvested in to even a greater extent is making that operational. What that means is producing products and services that are relevant, that resonate with Latinos, that produce in-store experiences that are friendly to Latinos. And by that I mean whether it's signage or staffing or the size of the dressing rooms, because we love to bring our extended families to the store with us, right. Or quite simply, the overall context of what Latinos mean for a corporation. And frankly, what I've been observing lately is that there's not so much resistance from the higher levels in the organizations. Sometimes it's actually in middle management. So it's among the colleagues of people in the organization who simply have not bought into the fact that this is good for the corporation's future.
It's good for business.
It's good for business overall. It's good for their paychecks too.
Right. Well, you know, I think the subject of politics has really moved some of our followers today. We have a question that says, how come the director of Hispanic education for the White House actually does not speak Spanish? Does anybody know that? Raul, you're in Washington. You want to try to take that one?
I certainly can't, but I would say that the Hispanics, you know, some are bilingual, others are not. So that's just part of the reality about being Hispanic in the United States. That's all I could say, really. So.
I'm not sure that's correct.
Really?
In a way, because you know, in fact, some of the White House people are fairly, you know, they were selected not necessarily because of their Spanish-speaking skills, right. And so, you know, we often might complain, you know, that, well, that person speaks Spanish with an accent or right. Doesn't speak it well. You know, we're always complaining about, you know, how Cuban Americans, for example, pronounce their R's, right? But or don't pronounce their R's, right? But I think you know, that there are a number of very talented people in the White House who, again, if we're going to measure their skills by how they pronounce a particular idiom, it's one thing. I think we ought to measure them by outcomes, right? So.
This question is probably for Manny and for Cesar. What industries or sectors, in your opinion, need to start focusing on the Hispanic market? I know Manny talked a little earlier about pharma and technology. Cesar, do you have some thoughts on what are the industries that you feel that still could begin to invest in this market?
Well, there are many. Classically, it's been the consumer packaged goods companies that have taken the lead for good reasons.
Right.
We have lots of mouths to feed and lots of bodies to bathe and lots of floors to clean and all that type of thing. So I think they've been at the leadership in that regard. However, I just got back, as I mentioned to you earlier, I just got back from the largest retail conference in the country, probably the world. This was a conference attended by about 35,000 people. Wow. It's retail, and all the major brands are there. We had an exhibit there, and we had lots of great conversations with major retail brands who were there. And I was very pleased to participate. This is the first time we participated as a company. And I had some of my colleagues from our San Diego office in presence as well. And what surprised me was that they were so eager to learn about the Hispanic market. It was a pleasant surprise, but at the same time, it was about time. You know, it's we're here in 2011, and we're still getting people really up to speed on the importance of this. And frankly, if we're starting this in 2011, it's going to take a while.
Right.
Because these days, in this sort of, let's just hope to call it post-recessionary time, things have changed in terms of approval levels and initiatives that need to take place, take a lot longer to put into place. But other industries, certainly financial services, and that includes insurance and banking as well as others. I believe you mentioned pharma and healthcare, perhaps could become a little bit more proactive, and telecommunications by all means. Yeah. You know, just measure the minutes.
Talk more.
Exactly. Text more, talk more, take more pictures, et cetera, et cetera. So it affects basically all industries. And the good news is that for those slow-moving industries, the good news is that there's under-penetrated markets.
Right.
And that means that you can get some of the low-hanging fruit, show your successes, get that budget approved for next year, and things should be good. So it's really a positive note more than anything.
Manny, I see that you have some thoughts on that.
I have a couple of thoughts. We always think about the sectors as the opportunities, but I also think that we need to think about the opportunities in terms of the regions. You know, when you have 50%, almost 50% of the population concentrated in just two states, Texas and California. Well, that's, for me, no matter what business I'm in, no matter what industry I'm in, that's a wake-up call to me saying, wait a second, I have an opportunity regardless of what industry I may be in, whether I'm selling hamburgers or packaged goods or whatever. I need to be very proactive because, gee, in my backyard, the majority of the people here are culturally, at least, if not in language, Latinos. So I think that in those, if you're living in one of the major metropolitan areas in the United States, and a lot of us can name all the cities in order from 1 to 10, and have a huge chunk of the population concentrated there, we will notice that if you're in those cities, if you're in Miami, New York, Chicago, et cetera, and you're not already proactively reaching out to your market, either because your business is based there or you're statewide, you're really losing the picture regardless of what industry you're in. That's one thing that I see. And it's amazing to me, when I was in the PR agency side, it would amaze me when somebody from New York say, hey, we have a major campaign, it's a general market campaign, and it's going to come to Miami, and we're thinking of reaching out to a couple Hispanic media so that they might come out. And I'm like, hello, the majority of this population here is Hispanic.
Yeah.
You got to turn it around.
Networks
you
are
got to turn your whole,
networks.
you got to turn your whole mentality around. So think not just in terms of the regional, not just in terms of the vertical business, the packaged goods and food and tech, et cetera. Think also if you're in a major state or in a major city, that if you're in Illinois, if you're in Texas, if you're in Florida or New York, and Arizona, New Mexico, which has the majority of its population Hispanic, I mean, you need to be very much ingrained Hispanic. One other point that Cesar brought, he was talking about how when there is outreach, when there is a Hispanic focus, it tends to manifest itself through communications and marketing, and that's good. I think that what you were also alluding to is the fact that corporately, it's not just developing products, but it's also in hiring Latinos, really making a concerted effort so that it's not a politically correct thing, because this is not about political correctness. Yeah, this is about business. The reality of being an American in the United States is changing every year. More Hispanics represent what being an American is. So if you're really patriotic, you want Latinos to succeed in education, succeed in business, because guess what? As you guys said, the payrolls, the income tax, the Social Security, everybody who's making a contribution that's powering this country are Hispanics. So you can't spite the hand that feeds you. This is the hand that will be feeding us in an increasing role. So I just wanted to add that point as well.
Well, Diana asked how PR and advertising companies are adjusting to the Hispanic population growth, and this question is for Manny and Cesar. You know, how are agencies or people that are in the marketing business, how are they adjusting to all this, and how are they dealing with corporate America?
Well, for many years, thank you, Manny. For many years, frankly, we've seen this tension between Spanish versus English, right? And this was dialogue that we had 10 years ago. Right. And some of us would say it's not about Spanish versus English. We love both languages, right? We love both languages. We like to use them as much as possible. We like rock and roll. We like salsa and ketchup, you know, banda and everything else. I meant the music, by the way. I know. So I think that the idea that Hispanics only speak Spanish needs to be revisited. Exactly. We speak both languages. We love both languages. We love America, and we live in both worlds. So I think what we see is that there's tension for Hispanic marketing and advertising agencies to figure out how they're going to navigate this new mainstream America, where Hispanics, many of us prefer to speak in Spanish and speak mostly Spanish, and many of us speak both languages. And even if we don't speak much Spanish, we like to live as Hispanics, dance as Hispanics, eat as Hispanics, hug as Hispanics, right, etc. So it's about this new cultural mainstream. And frankly, I think that the news is also good, because I think it represents an opportunity for leadership. And I think that all of our friends in marketing and advertising agencies need to seize the opportunity to lead this new American mainstream that is heavily Hispanic, but is also multicultural and multi-ethnic. And I think that's where we see the tension. And so I would love to see examples where some of our leading agencies become the leader, period, as opposed to the leading Hispanic agency. Right. And that would truly be a sweet victory.
Okay, I'll take that as a personal challenge.